To rethinking HR, interviewing.
Yep.
Tyler.
And
Okay,
so Marc and Marc and I host Rethink HR on LinkedIn. We do this every month. If you haven't been to any of our episodes, you know, so we talk about everything from interviewing, like we are today, talent development, leadership. If anybody has any topics that they love us to talk about with new innovative ideas in HR, please let us know. We're always open to new topics. So what we do is we have a very innovative discussion about different things in HR. And today we're talking about the interviewing, which is a very personal one for me. I know all of us have been on both sides of the coin, right? As a candidate with interview experiences that have gone really well, to others that have been miserable, where people, don't get back to you in 30 days or 90, or 6 months later, they send you an email. Also interviewing candidates that might be doing, weird things in the interview process and how to evaluate that. And especially with ever-changing technology that we're seeing, how does that impact interviewing from that standpoint? So one thing I want to touch on is there's a lot of discussion, not just in the HR space, but I think in general about AI's influence on what we do on a day-to-day basis. And one thing that's becoming very common is with the remote interviewing, like in video interviews or in phone interviews, is people using AI chat prompts during the interview to help answer questions related. So for example, let's say your company, they might type into ChatGPT and someone asks you, what do you know about our company or the culture? They might use ChatGPT to just get the answer and give them the best answer that they read off to the interviewer. So one thing we just want to touch on first is how to be aware of AI's impact in this and what that might be. And Marc, maybe you have some insight on, your side of the coin about, is this good? Is this bad? What can we do? That people are always gaming the system, right? So how do interviewers or companies help with that?
Like most good answers, Tyler, the word depends comes in, right? So it depends, right? If this isn't new that people would be trying to get a role at a company and are going to use every resource possible. They're going to use templates. They're going to go and do research. So before AI, people were going and looking for past interview questions, and they were already doing research on assessments to know how to answer questions correctly. So this has been happening forever. But the thing is that as HR professionals, or even as an executive coach and leadership coach, what I want to make sure I tell people is that whatever way that you show up in an interview, it's going to be tested at some point if you can actually produce results that are similar to the answers you gave. So for example, you talked about prompts. Using a prompt and AI to find out more about the company may not be a bad thing. It shows that you know how to do research. It shows that you know how to use tools. It shows that you know how to be able to take something that may actually be very confusing on a corporate website and be able to spell it back very simply. What becomes more of an issue is skills. So when I ask you about a skill set and you're giving an answer and you don't actually have that skill set, that's going to show up and that's going to be ugly later. That's really the concern. And I think a lot of companies are feeling that same way. Not technology is bad, but are you going to be able to show what you said, show your work, so to speak, when it comes to really working at the job?
Right. And I think it's the same thing with education, where universities, where there's always a gamification going on, right? Back in the day, it's like plagiarism. Then it's like Spark Notes. Oh, I don't have to read a book. I'll just pick up Spark Notes and, read the chapters and then, use that to skip reading a 500-page book. And, then I can write a good essay based on that. So there's always something, right? Whenever there's innovation that's gaming the system. I just think that AI pushes it so far, right? It's like, it's one thing when you're getting like assistance. It's another thing when it's like it's a full-fledged answer that you can work with. So I think we need to think about we need to rethink really how to get around this with the interviewing. Because if you're just doing video interviews and phone screens and you're using your same 5-10 questions and they're pretty prompts, easy to prompt out, maybe it's a time now to make changes on that and ask questions that might not be so easy to easily get a quick prompt on, right? Because the other issue is with Glassdoor, is people are telling them, right? If you go on Glassdoor and you look at reviews, you can see they asked me these questions in the interview process. People are researching that. They know. So they're going in 80% of the time. They know what you're going to ask. So I almost think this kind of bridges the gap of like almost like a dynamic interviewing process where you might want to rotate questions, or at least some of them. That's one thing that comes to mind, right? At least if you're doing 5 to 10 questions in a phone interview or video interview, maybe 2 or 3 get rotated or enough. So, or you ask one that tries to be a little bit more specific so you don't get caught in this, because you don't want to be pushing people through the interview process who, once they get to the in-person, are like, wait, this is not what that person was on the phone, which happens anyway, but it could be happening worse. So I'm pro like taking a more dynamic approach to interviewing, as opposed to like, we've been very set in like, okay, we're going to ask these 10 questions or 5 questions. That might now in this day and age may not work.
Right.
And that's kind of this my take on it. What do you think on something like that?
I think using questions that are standard questions have gone out a long time ago from most organizations. I'm hoping that they're not just saying, where do you see yourself in 5 years? What are you going to do? It's really got to be questions about the person. So at least you can find out, like you said, specificity that's about them, right? Now, we're not talking about personal questions that are illegal to ask, but questions where you get and you can drill down after the question. You and I talked about this before we got live. It was like asking 2 or 3 drill down questions based on some of the answers they give you that they couldn't have prepared for unless they actually knew it, because you're asking them to show. So you see body language, you see a lot of other things that you're going to see, you see where their eyes go. And what happens is that, I'm concerned that if you're so against AI being used, then think about what the issue is. Are you telling candidates, hey, by the way, when we do our interviewing process, we do background checks, we actually do drug screenings, we are an equal opportunity employer, and by the way, we don't permit use of AI during our questions. Now, doesn't that sound crazy to say that? Why is it any crazier saying you do background checks?
Yeah, I'm not saying to ban. I'm not saying that people shouldn't use it. I'm more.
No, but if they do, so Tyler,
how do you evaluate the situation, right?
But here's the thing, though, Tyler. So there's 2 sides of this coin, right? And I like taking both sides, right? Because there's employees. But the thing is that if you go against us and you say, hey, listen, we don't accept this as a way to be able to do it, then at least that people that do it don't follow your rules. Going down the process later, it already shows they didn't really care about what you said was important to you. Again, it's just one approach. Some companies are like, we are this way. This is our culture. You can use technology or not use technology. So it's just an option out there to rethink things.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think it's just a matter of being aware and maybe reviewing what you're asking candidates. I mean, especially if you have a role that has like tons of applicants, or it's very high volume in the sense of like, we're hiring hundreds of people this year. Like, that stuff's going to be all over the internet. And it's like, it does affect the evaluation if people are if you know the questions in advance and they might be using canned answers to get through to that next step. I'm just trying to make it more efficient for people, where it's like, okay, we know based on this, or based on some questions that we ask, or also how you ask the questions matter to me. It's
context. But see, I want to push back on this, because I kind of like us arguing about this from 2 different sides, even though we aren't really. Right. Lindsay was saying that, there was a comment right now that Lindsay made that talked about there was textbook chat GPT answer that somebody gave. So if that's your culture and you're looking at that organization and you're trying to use a chat GPT answer, what does that say about the candidate? Now you have to decide as an employer, do you care about that someone used that? And then how about as the person who's like doing it, you're like, well, I don't have an answer, so I'm going to use it. Think about how you feel, right? That we're wasting time if we wind up we're not the right fit for the job. I wish people would use some of their own intellect to go and answer questions to show who they really are. Because what you just said, Tyler, hey, we're hiring hundreds of people, Mark. We have to be efficient. These are humans, individual humans. I don't care if you're hiring 1,000 people. The thing is, there's individual humans with their own lives that are trying to make a living, and there's employers that want something done. Why have we removed so much of treating people as individuals? Because the process of mass marketing, getting them in there, that we start to use AI to actually look at their resumes, and we go and we don't respond back to them. So I'm just trying to take both sides to say this is still a human process. How do we still care and be able to do it and rethink it differently?
No, totally. I think that's a valid point. I think it's just a matter of how you get around, how do you make it work more effectively for what you're trying to accomplish, versus wasting time with candidates that you're like, okay, how come we got so many candidates in the next round that we're not up to par? And this is where like measurement might be really important. Like how to use that data from the standpoint of what percent after the phone interview are we seeing a drop off where like our hiring managers are like, oh my God, 30% less people. Okay, now then you might take a look back. How much of an impact is it really having on it? Because like you said, being able to use AI to get a canned answer, okay, showing resourcefulness, depending on what it is, but it's a lack of authenticity because this person is presenting themselves as something that they're not early on.
Okay, so let's take that point, Tyler. So we ask people to dress up for an interview, right? In clothes they might never wear normally, right? So do we see people now after COVID where there's a relaxed dress code and you can't say business casual? You have to actually define it because people would show up in sweatpants because that was their business casual at home. I think it's really important. And this is, I think, the point that's missed the most, defining your expectations. This is the way our organization runs. We love technology. We're willing to let you use technology in ways, but you got to show up authentically because we actually get together multiple times a year and we want what matches what you say you are to be who you actually are, at least in the business environment, in a way where what you say you can do, you actually can do. And, can we get back to times like that where it's actually an alignment, where it's not, I'm this business person at work where I have to go and use all these tools to prove who I am because I'm really not that person in real life.
Yeah. No, I get it. And I think like another way to think about this too, I think it's not just the interview, like how do you set up for that interview or in what stage? So, using like assessment tools, I think using them the right way can help aid the interview process because it allows for a more dynamic approach to the interviewing, right? So like, for example, just using behavioral assessment tool, for example, right? If you know that someone has certain characteristics and that's led to better performance, how do you evaluate that person now? That now allows you to be more flex in the interview process as opposed to just, again, sticking to the same thing. I think just understanding like a more dynamic approach to it and a more of a strategic approach in how we think about interview guides and setting those up, or how you think about ideal candidate profiles can allow you to get around this problem and allow you to evaluate people on a more deeper, authentic level. I think that's a lot of times the missing piece is we like to, like you said, we have a lot of candidates. We want to get through it, right? We want to just push them through to the in-person. And then a lot of times at that stage, the people interviewing them, they may not follow an interview guide, or you may not have one, or you may not have an ideal profile that is in-depth enough. My whole thing is getting enough data points into that process so it makes it more efficient and it allows you to evaluate people on a much deeper level and increase that success rate. Because I think a lot of times, like you said, like interviewing, right? You only have an hour with somebody, or maybe max 2 or 3 hours, right, through the whole process. How can you get that to what it simulates the job, right? It's very hard to do. So that's my feeling is multiple data points, measurement, and dynamic. And that's my science side of HR working. But
it needs to have both sides, right? So that's part of this has been something from the the dawn of hiring, right? Do we hire people just like us because we like us, right? And leaders go and put job specs out that are just like, we want this, but they're not always based on the best candidate. I like using data, and that's why, Tyler, you and I are even having this conversation. There's a mix between using the right data, not too much data, right? And even smaller companies can use data in a way where they don't realize how much data they have. It's the ideal candidate, but it's also what's the variance between it. So that's why behavioral, but also cognitive. How fast are they going to absorb? How fast are they going to be able to do this role? Now, if you got somebody answering with technology, and they say they can answer quickly, great. They might be able to research the answer. But if it's a real-time job where they're actually going to be in sales and they actually have to have the answer and they can't be on their phone, chat GPTing the answer in real time, they're going to be a fail. But we have to be able to weed them out with data, but also understand how are you working with people to the point where you can see that after you hire them 3 months later, hold on, no, 30 days later, how well did they fit? What did the leaders tell you about them? How much was the alignment between what HR and the job spec was and what happened? And how are we using data to find out all that additional breadcrumbs that go from when the hiring was to how well they performed to actually the longevity of that employee? A lot of that data is lost and or not used.
Yeah. And I think like at the same time too, like we like you said, we tend to hire people that are like us as opposed to like what might be right for our team or our company. It's just human nature to be like, oh, this person, like, it's just the nature, right? You have a good conversation with them. You think they're a good fit for the role, but did you really evaluate what makes success in this role? And I'm not saying to hire someone that you don't like or something you don't think is a good fit, but I'm just saying that what I found and when I've done these analysis, like with companies, there's always like a bias that comes in of like what they think works and what actually does. And it's usually what they think doesn't necessarily line up with what actually leads to success or makes someone a good fit from a cultural standpoint, performance standpoint, organization and team. So that's a common problem. Like when I've done this, I notice, hey, especially with sales teams, we have a tendency to hire people that are very extroverted, like just on average, because we think that makes a good salesperson. But what I found is when I worked with all these sales organizations that most of the time that is not the leading indicator of success because the job isn't just about being extroverted. It's about other things usually. So I think getting a better understanding of like an ideal candidate profile that goes beyond just, I think, our baseline can set this interviewing up and rethink the process in a way that makes it strategic in how we execute. And I think that's where the missing piece is. And it's not just HR. It's also like, how does that get fed into the hiring managers who you're supporting and giving them the tools that they need to evaluate people correctly? Because I've had my own, like when I was a candidate, I've had great experiences from the HR side. And then you go into the hiring manager side and it's like, what just happened in this interview? And it's like, everything just comes in from like, you're like, what's going on? And I feel like that loss of structure also makes candidates turn down the jobs too, that you might like. Why? Because they may have had a bad experience through that. Again, the evaluation goes both ways. So I think the more structured understanding strategy, take a dynamic approach with multiple data points in this day and age, it should get you to a better result.
So I know as we kind of talk about this, I have some empathy for some candidates because, I have kids that are in the workforce as well that, apply for jobs and have been through this. So it's been a while since I applied for a job, since I've had my own company for a long time. So I don't get to experience it. I get to experience what executives tell me when they're moving up, even in their own organization, what it looks like to move up. But look at it from a different way. When you talk about hiring and you talk about what's going on, the experience you mentioned about what it feels like to be a candidate. There's so many jobs that are listed that aren't even jobs. They're ghost jobs listed by companies. We were just reading articles about how many companies just put this out there to make people feel like there's all these jobs and we're hiring and we're growing, but it's a lie. So yeah. What do you think about that, Tyler, that there's fake jobs and they actually put you through fake interviews, but they're interviews that you go through, but there's not really a position to hire? How does that make people feel, you think?
Yeah, not good. I think it's an illusion. It's an illusion for company PR, I guess, in the end. I mean, in reality, hey, look, we're growing. Look at all the jobs we have available. Oh, that's going to make people think deeply that our company's growing as well. But again, like at some point that's a bad rep in the end, right? Like how long can you play that game of that? I think some companies do that too, to like try to build a candidate pool early. Like, so, okay, we could like build that early over time as a way. And the other thing that I notice is like companies will open jobs and close them quickly, or like they might have a job and they're like, actually, we changed our mind. We want this. So I think that happens a lot as well. No, I think the whole like interviewing experience overall can definitely be improved. I think of
where does it start though? Well, where does it start though? Because that's the thing that's been bothering me. It's like you and I both know it. Lots of people know it. We've been through it. We hear stories, but where does it start changing?
Yeah, I think it starts with the company because in the end, it's like you create the structure you create the process, maybe just being transparent about the process and how it works. And hey, we do these things because this allows us to make sure it's a good fit for you. Because I think a lot of times what gets lost in this is that the candidate doesn't realize sometimes, like, you also need to fit within this, because the second you sign that offer letter, you're now in this company and you're at a date. People don't realize this. You're in a day-to-day grind at this company. So it better be a good fit too for you, because after 2 weeks or 3 months or 6 months, you might start hating your job, or you might not like it anymore because, oh, it turns out that it wasn't what you expected. So I think the company being structured allows that transparency, provides a transparency. Yes, candidates are going to do things that are right. And you, at least within your structure, you believe in that, and at least eliminates a lot of that problem, I think. And yeah, I also, like, lastly, I also think when we think about interviewing too, is like, yes, we may have a lot of roles across countries, but who's managing those specific teams and who's around those teams matters also to who you should hire, because that person needs to fit into the team a certain way. In the same way, like in basketball, like, we don't hire 5 point guards or 5 centers, right? For, like, your team just wouldn't work. It's about finding someone who fits the system. So you could actually get really dynamic and understanding, okay, what's this team makeup? What do they really need? And how does that change who you hire and how you evaluate candidates? That to me that's obviously like a very, like, a bigger step, but that can also make this a better experience, because you're now understand what you're looking for that specific team and do that. That's my take.
And you're spot on with the rethinking of the way that's being done. But I think that some companies are like, we're too big to change, or we've had the system, or, it's easier said than done. And, I wrote a book called Yeah, But, because every yeah, but's an excuse, yeah, but I'm too old. Yeah, but I have no time. And every yeah, but that people use. And the thing about it, Tyler, is that if you don't change, right, you're going to keep hiring the wrong people. The managers and the leaders, you're going to have dynamics that don't work inside the organization. So if you're really going to rethink, it's measuring what you're doing currently to understand what its success is. The success isn't finding a candidate. The success is finding a candidate that fits and stays and is engaged and loves their job, and their leader loves that they hired them. That's not a fantasy or a fairy tale. That should be the goal. Now, I know what you're saying. You're saying, like, well, did we try our best to do that? I think that's why we talk about, when you hire someone or someone leaves, you got a brand new team. So every new hire creates a new team. Every new employee that leaves that team creates a new team. So if you know that's true, how are we going to use data, right? We use behavioral. I use the predictive index a lot. And how do we use behavioral assessments and cognitive assessments to be part of it? How do you use in-person interviews? How do you go and measure leadership and see how they stick? How do you go and actually rewrite when a leader gives you an actual job description and you rewrite it, or have conversations to say, hey, this is aspirational. I don't really think we need somebody with a 4-year degree anymore that we used to 4 years ago. Maybe there's some people out there that actually have different ways of learning and are actually going to be more valuable and useful in this role. It's pushing back on these things and even starting small. That's where I've seen us have the most success with changing the way an organization hires and retains.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think it's about, evaluating it and starting into one piece. Like, I think with all this stuff, it's all in stages. And I think just figuring out, like, looking at the data and understanding, okay, what's really makes a good fit here or not. I think a lot of companies have a hard time just doing that itself, where they're like, oh, these skills make someone a good fit, but obviously skills are only one piece of a job. And what does that mean? And how you evaluating the soft skills and the culture and the org, and what does that mean? I think getting that understanding as a baseline, and then making changes stage by stage of each. Because, like I said, like, yes, my dream is like all my things that for Rethink, right? It's like, oh, think about this way and create an interview guide like this. But in reality, that can only be done in phases, right? So
yeah,
yes.
You got to take the first step to actually do it. And that's the thing. It can't happen internally. And what I've learned most in my role as a consultant and a strategist is that it's so hard to look on the inside and fix something on the inside. When you get an outside view, people look, and I can ask questions, and Tyler, you ask questions to people, and they have to answer it in a way where you're not getting the employee line on it. You actually have to prove your work, so to speak, and say, tell me how this is working. Tell me what needs to be changed. How old is this document? When has this process been improved? What's changed after COVID that wasn't there before COVID? And all these things. And then it's just an incremental process. But if you don't do it, it doesn't matter how great the workforce is, where you're going to be like, people are leaving or not leaving. You want engaged workers. So you want to make sure you're ingesting them into an environment that they're expecting what it's going to look like, and that you're setting expectations both ways, and you're actually saying who you really truly are. And everything you do to posture that you're kind of creating a facade, it's going to come back to haunt you. It really truly is.
Oh yeah, it always does. I think it's the same thing. It always comes back just like full circle in terms of that. Any other like rethinking ideas? Any other rethink interviewing things that come to your mind that you're like, oh, we missed on? Hey, like this would totally change things. Like for example, some companies do 2 people interviewing 1 person, or like panels, which I actually think can be a lot for people. Some companies like I think BlackRock or one of them does that, where it's like you could sit and it's like an actual panel, and but I don't know if that's really something that is good for or makes a difference in the process. But is there anything else that you think within the interviewing process that you think could be innovated on?
I really think the authenticity that people say from the interview to my hiring, the company was exactly what I thought it was. Now think about that sentence, right? That phrase of, when I went there, I already thought I knew about the organization, but they helped me know more about them, and they're exactly what I thought, but more. That's the way I'd love to be seen as an organization. I think a lot of other people would too. So the external appearance, how you say you're going to be, the people you hire in HR, and the leaders that are actually putting the job descriptions align. Anything that's off from that still has room for improvement. I know that's the best way for things to happen. But the thing is that if you really care about the people and you really want this to be in alignment, wouldn't it be great to be as authentic and integrous as you say you are all the way through the whole process? And since again, you're dealing with people's lives. Until you hire robots to replace everybody, and even robots have personalities. I have a Roomba. It has a personality. But it's that are, and I think the more you can make that align, the better it is for the whole process. And you got to prove it, not just say, we're a great company that people love to work for. Let me ask them. Let me find out if that's actually true as well.
Exactly. All right. So to wrap up here, so Marc and I don't know if you guys missed the beginning, but we host LinkedIn Live, Rethink HR, almost monthly. We cover innovative topics, everything from interviewing, talent development, leadership, retention. Anybody has any topics that they recommend or they want to hear from us on, drop them in the chat or friend us on LinkedIn and send us a message. And it's, so we're always happy to talk. We're also looking for guests potentially. So if any HR professionals want to talk about any innovative strategies that they put into their company that they think they'd like to share, we'd be happy to have that. So we're opening that up as well.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. Yeah, it's been a lot of fun actually having these conversations, because HR affects every role. As an executive strategist and leadership coach, this is the thing that people talk most about, is their job, their role, their boss, what goes on, how they hire. So there's a lot of insight between Tyler and I about what we see happen and how to avoid the train wreck that comes from not ignoring the signals that are showing when things are changing at your organization.
Yeah. All right. On that note, everyone have a great rest of your week. Marc, good seeing you. I'll see you next time.
Yep. Good seeing you.